11. Tongue-burning sour candies. In November 2021, a young girl from Melbourne, Australia, named Willow, snuck 10 warhead candies out of her brother's private stash while her mom wasn't looking. She quickly ate them all so she wouldn't get caught. The next thing she knew, her tongue started to hurt really bad. It got to the point that she couldn't bear it any longer. Willow ran to her mom, Kirsty, and told her that it felt like skin was peeling off of her tongue. To Kirsty's horror, there was a large, visible crater in her daughter's tongue. The terrified mom later told Australia's 9 News that she burst into tears when she saw it, since she'd never seen anything like it before and was extremely worried for her child. Thankfully, the damage looked worse than it was. While there was nothing Willow's doctor could do to fix her tongue at that moment, he reassured Kirsty that the girl would recover in a few days. In the meantime, he recommended she take pain medication and eat popsicles to help numb the afflicted area. Warheads actually contain a warning on the package about how eating multiple pieces of the candy in a short time can severely irritate both the tongue and mouth. But it would be unrealistic to expect kids to read the fine print. The warning is more of a precaution on the company's side, so parents can't sue. And since Willow managed to get her hands on the candies despite being watched by her mother, Kirsty made the executive decision to take the candy out of her house entirely. Either way, Willow made it clear that she'd learned her lesson, telling 9 News that she didn't plan on eating any more warheads, but that she'd settle for some McDonald's instead. 10. The West Salem Candy Murder. A 59-year-old sheep rancher named Clifford Badger was coming home from a business trip in March 1971 when he decided to stop and grab the mail outside his Wayne County, Ohio farmhouse. Inside the mailbox was a delicate box of homemade chocolates and a card stating, "To our good neighbors." Badger had no idea who sent him the package, but it seemed harmless, so he ate one of the goodies and went about his day doing farm chores. Just a few minutes later, he felt too sick to continue working. So he went inside, sat down in his kitchen, and died right there in his chair. The farmer's wife, Helen, also grew sick after eating the candy, but she managed to call for help and lived. Investigators discovered that the chocolate was laced with a pest poison called strychnine. They also noticed that the return address on the package was a fake address, and that the parcel wasn't postmarked. Someone had hand-delivered it to the couple's mailbox with the sole intent to kill them, and police had no idea who it might have been. Badger had no known enemies or neighborly disputes at the time of his death. In an article that popped up in the Akron Beacon Journal not long after his death, a reporter mentioned that there was speculation about Badger's harsh treatment towards several dogs who accidentally strayed onto his farm, so someone may have killed him as revenge for shooting their pet. 10 days after the murder, another note with the same handwriting as the card that came with the chocolates showed up at Badger's farm. It read, "We told him we would get him, and we did." The sender signed off this time as the Hunters, which was believed to be a reference to 2 raccoon hunting dogs Badger shot and killed on his property before his death. Authorities closed the case about 3 years later, but they refused to reveal the accused killer's name, since the person had passed away, and would therefore be unable to defend themselves in court. The sheriff at the time, James Frost, said that the suspect had been identified by comparing the handwriting on the note that came with the chocolates to other notes that the Badgers had been given. He also said that a motive for the killings was determined, but declined to reveal what it was, and denied that the person had any connection to the owners of the dogs Badger killed. Sheriff Frost refused to disclose when the suspect died or their manner of death, saying that it would be too easy to identify the person if he shared that private information. He went on to explain that he'd asked the Badger family not to discuss the case with anyone outside of their group. Author Greg Olson discovered the so-called West Salem candy murder case, while investigating another mysterious Wayne County death that took place in early 2023. He found it strange that the sheriff chose to withhold the identity of the Badger's suspected killer and became determined to figure out who it is, since he thinks the public has the right to know. Olson created a website specifically dedicated to solving the case, complete with a contact form and a guarantee of anonymity to anyone who comes forward with more information. 9. Licorice overdose. In early 2019, a seemingly healthy 54-year-old man with no prior history of heart problems went into sudden cardiac arrest and collapsed inside a Massachusetts McDonald's restaurant. He was rushed to a nearby emergency room where he died just 24 hours later. The doctors who treated the man at the hospital noticed that his potassium levels were extremely low, which triggered his initial cardiac arrest. But at first, they struggled to figure out exactly why his potassium levels were so low. They were especially confused about the circumstances of his death, considering the lack of cardiac disease in his family history. They were surprised to find out that the man had died from eating too much black licorice, which has a plant extract in it called glycyrrhizin. This naturally occurring compound can cause the kidneys to release too much potassium when ingested in large amounts. This, in turn, can lead to dangerously low potassium levels and cause irregular heart activity. Over a 3-week period leading up to his death, the man had eaten 1 to 2 large bags of black licorice each day. Even after taking his overindulgence into consideration, doctors found it shocking that a patient passed away from eating too much candy. There may have been other factors at play, though. According to the man's family, he was a pack-a-day smoker with extremely poor eating habits. But a report detailing the findings of the team who treated the patient confirmed that his excessive black licorice consumption served as the deadly tipping point. Many experts agreed that this was a bizarre, rare case, but that it also serves as proof that eating too much black licorice can be fatal. On its website, the Food and Drug Administration warns that consuming more than 2 ounces of the candy per day can cause heart arrhythmia in people over the age of 40. Just like anything else, it's fine in moderation, but as this unusual case shows, going overboard can have severe health effects. 8. Exploding chewing gum. A 25-year-old chemistry student named Vladimir Likonos was spending his holiday break with family back in 2009 when his chewing gum suddenly exploded and blew half his face off. According to news reports, Likonos was sitting at his computer when his mom overheard the blast from a nearby room. She rushed in and found her son bleeding profusely with his whole jaw missing. Sadly, emergency responders were unable to save Likonos, who died from his injuries at the scene. An investigation discovered that Likonos had a bad habit of dipping his gum into citric acid to enhance its sour flavor. While distracted, he accidentally dipped it into an explosive powder that was sitting nearby. It was most likely used as part of his studies. Vladimir was remembered as a quiet, level-headed, smart person who had a passion for science. Unfortunately, his not-so-intelligent last decision not to keep his hazardous materials separated from a substance he regularly put into his body cost him his life. The careless mistake is surprising considering Vladimir's advanced understanding of chemistry and the dangerous reactions that certain materials can cause. 7. Psychics poisoned chocolate. The Brazilian city of Maceió is a mecca for fortune tellers. During a visit to the psychic hub back in 2023, 27-year-old Fernanda Silva Veloz da Cruz Pinto received a palm reading from an elderly woman working on the street. The woman told Pinto that she only had a few days left to live and gave her a piece of wrapped chocolate as they parted ways. Pinto ate the chocolate and quickly grew ill with terrifying symptoms including weakness, a racing heart, vomiting, dizziness, and blurred vision. In a series of text messages sent to family members, she wrote that she had a terrible, bitter taste in her mouth. The young woman's family initially suspected that she was experiencing side effects of conditions she'd had a history of suffering from, including gastroenteritis and ulcers. But they started to worry after Pinto mentioned the chocolate she ate and the fact that she was told she was going to die. As her condition got worse, Pinto decided to visit the emergency room. By the time she arrived, her nose had started bleeding. She died 1 day after she ate the candy. 2 months later, a toxicology test revealed lethal levels of the pesticides sulfatep and turbufos inside Pinto's system. Speaking with a Brazilian news outlet called Globo One, an expert from the laboratory that tested the samples explained that the pesticides are popular among poisonings in Brazil, since they're easy to get, despite being carefully regulated by the government. Unfortunately, the presence of the chemicals in Pinto's system does not prove that she was poisoned by the chocolate. The deceased woman's family members told investigators about the clairvoyant, who they're reportedly still working to identify. For now, the family is left to wonder whether Pinto was targeted at random or if someone wanted her to die. 6. Deadly birthday delivery. As her 54th birthday approached in May 2023, Lindaci Viagas Batista de Carvalho received an anonymous flowers and chocolates delivery at her home in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Curious about who sent her the gifts and wary about eating chocolates from someone unknown, she did a bit of digging and got in touch with her ex-husband, who said he was the one who sent the gifts. Very shortly after eating a bit of the candy, Carvalho started convulsing violently. By the time she got to the emergency room, she was already dead. Traces of rat poison were found in her body, leading police to believe that the chocolates were poisoned. Carvalho's family claimed that she'd received death threats over social media not long before her death, furthering investigators' suspicions that she was murdered. After the tragedy, Carvalho's ex claimed that he was joking about sending the deadly treat. Detectives actually traced the crime to another woman the man had dated before, named Susan Martins da Silva, who saw Carvalho as a romantic rival. A screenshot of the social media conversation between the two from before Carvalho's death showed that Silva had sent the victim a picture of herself holding a gun, with a caption stating, "I say little, but I do a lot." According to several news reports, Silva became so terrified when Carvalho's death went viral online that she contacted the man she hired to deliver the package and threatened him, even though he told her that he wouldn't say anything. She was later arrested on suspicion of murder and is now awaiting her day in court. 5. The Jello antifreeze murders. 31-year-old Maurice Glenn Turner's death was first ruled natural after he passed away from flu-like symptoms in 1995. He went back to his Cobb County, Georgia home after being treated at the hospital and was discovered dead the next day by his wife, 27-year-old Lynn Turner. At the time, Lynn was having a secret affair with a firefighter from the neighboring Forsyth County named Randy Thompson. The marriage between Lynn and Glenn was troubled. Glenn had warned some of the people in his life that if something bad ever happened to him, Lynn probably had something to do with it. He was making plans to move out of the marital home when he fell fatally ill. Before leaving the couple's house on the day Glenn died, Lynn fed him some jello. He died within a few hours of eating it, and there were noticeable signs that he'd possibly succumbed to antifreeze poisoning. But the medical examiner ruled that he may have actually died from a heart attack, so no further investigation was carried out. Lynn collected about $225,000 from her late husband's estate, life insurance policies, and death benefits. And she moved in with Randy just 4 days after Glenn's sudden death. Tragedy hit again 6 years later in 2001, when Randy also died under circumstances that were suspiciously similar to Glenn's death. He showed up at an emergency room, also complaining of flu-like symptoms, and was soon discharged, only to go home and be found dead after eating Lynn's jello. She collected $30,000 from Thompson's life insurance policy. In the meantime, people started to wonder why seemingly healthy men seemed to drop dead around her. A toxicology test revealed that Thompson ingested lethal amounts of ethylene glycol, the main ingredient found in antifreeze. After realizing that he'd been deliberately poisoned, authorities exhumed Glenn Turner's body and discovered that he'd also died from ingesting the poisonous substance. Lynn was ultimately convicted of killing both Turner and Thompson. She received a life sentence, but only served a handful of years behind bars when she passed away in her cell in 2010. 4. The Delaware Box Chocolate Murders. The first ever murder committed through the U.S. mail system happened in August 1898, when a woman named Mary Elizabeth Dunning was sent a box of chocolates at her home in Dover, Delaware. The sweets came with a card identifying the sender as Mrs. C. Mary couldn't figure out who this was, but the candies looked delicious, so she decided to dig right in after eating her dinner. She shared them with a few household members and friends too. Everyone got sick and began vomiting violently within hours of eating the chocolate, prompting the family to call a doctor. He arrived at their house and found Mary red, swollen, and breaking out in a cold sweat. Her breathing was heavy, and she died shortly after. Mary's sister, Ida, also gave in to the sudden mystery illness. At the time, Mary was separated from her husband of 7 years, John Dunning, an Associated Press reporter who was covering the Spanish-American War in Puerto Rico at the time. Mary had left John a few years before after discovering that he was having an affair with a California woman named Cordelia Bodkin. Before leaving for Puerto Rico to cover the war, John told Cordelia that if he survived, he planned on trying to fix his marriage with Mary. Unwilling to accept that the affair was over, Cordelia decided that the only way to avoid losing John was to eliminate Mary. Arsenic-laced candy seemed like the perfect trick to do it. After the deaths of Mary and Ida, the chocolates tested positive for poison. When police asked questions, John was quick to throw his mistress under the bus. The murder trial was heavy with many complications. Traveling to testify and determining which state had jurisdiction to pursue the case were two of the biggest issues. There was also a lack of evidence until police searched Cordelia's apartment and found the same type of seal and string that had been used on the deadly box of chocolates. Cordelia admitted to the affair, but denied ever killing Mary, claiming that she was out of town when the chocolates were mailed. She was still found guilty by a jury in 1899, and then again in 1904 after being granted a retrial. The court sentenced her to life in prison, where she passed away in 1910 at the age of 56. 3. Mysterious fruit toxin outbreaks. Starting in 1995, the city of Muzaffarpur was hit by an annual outbreak of a mysterious illness that affected hundreds of young people. In the cases, a previously healthy patient grew deathly sick overnight. Initial symptoms were followed by seizures and comas, and an estimated 40% of cases were deadly. Then, like clockwork, each outbreak ended at the onset of the monsoon season. Authorities and experts struggled to pinpoint a cause for the mysterious sickness. It wasn't contagious, and things like heat stroke, pest-related infections, and pesticides were ruled out entirely. In 2014, Dr. Rajesh Yadav of the India Epidemic Intelligence Service moved to Muzaffarpur in hopes of getting to the bottom of things. He was part of a team that discovered that most of the victims who died had low blood sugar levels. A second major clue came after someone mentioned Jamaican vomiting sickness during a routine conference call. For years, children in the West Indies suffered from a similarly debilitating and deadly illness, characterized by convulsions, brain swelling, and an altered mental state. As it turned out, the patients had all eaten ackee fruit, which contains a toxin known as hypoglycine. When a malnourished individual eats fruit with hypoglycine on an empty stomach, it can cause their blood sugar levels to drop dangerously low. Acting on this, researchers in India tested lychee fruit and learned that it also contains high levels of hypoglycine and a similar toxin. After the discovery, officials started advising the local population to make sure that they eat a meal at night and to limit lychee consumption. As a result, annual reported cases dropped from several hundred to less than 50 a year. 2. Poison apples and ice cream. At least 7 different people died, and dozens more were hospitalized in the United States in 2014 after eating pre-packaged caramel apples that were infected with listeria. 35 illnesses were reported in 12 states, and 34 individuals were hospitalized. At least 2 cases with the same DNA fingerprint as the American cases were also detected in Canada. Listeria is a bacterium that can cause a potentially deadly infection known as listeriosis. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 1,600 Americans are infected each year, and 260 of those cases are fatal. Many people who become infected with listeria do not fall dangerously ill. Pregnant women are reportedly 10 times more likely to contract serious cases of listeriosis. 11 of the people affected by the 2014 outbreak were pregnant. Women who have recently given birth, adults over 65, and people with weakened immune systems are also at a higher risk. Symptoms are often flu-like, with muscle aches and fatigue, and can also include fever, headache, confusion, a loss of balance, and seizures. Many of the listeriosis outbreaks in the U.S. over the last 10 years have involved infected meats, cheeses, and produce. But there have been outbreaks stemming from infected sweets other than the 2014 caramel apple incident. Over a 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, 10 people in 4 separate states got sick from eating infected Bluebell Creamery's ice cream. All 10 patients were sent to the hospital, and 3 patients died in Kansas. Health officials didn't discover the contaminated foods until the tail end of the outbreak, which ended in Bluebell voluntarily recalling all its products that were made in the affected facilities. More recently, 27 people were hospitalized with listeriosis, and 1 person passed away after eating infected Big Olaf brand ice cream over a 20-month period that began in 2021. Almost all the patients either lived in or were visiting Florida before the onset of their symptoms. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Death by chocolate. While working at a confectionery factory outside Moscow, Russia in 2016, 24-year-old Svetlana Roslina became fatally trapped in a vat of boiling hot chocolate. In the words of one source, the young woman was essentially minced by the machine's industrial-sized mixer, leaving only her legs still intact. According to one story that circulated around after the tragedy, Roslina dropped her cell phone into the chocolate and fell into the vat while trying to reach in to retrieve it. Another version of events claimed that she fell in while emptying a sack of flour into the vat. While it's unclear exactly what went down, the incident was no doubt a tragedy with a horrific end for the married mother of 2, whose husband and kids didn't expect to not see or speak to her again after she left for work that morning. 10. Fraser Island. Fraser Island in Australia is one of the most beautiful places in the world, but it's also one of the most dangerous. Like many places in Australia, there are terrifying land creatures, deadly marine life, and terrain that can kill. Fraser Island is home to about 30 packs of wild dingoes, and while being attacked by a dingo is extremely rare, it has happened in the past. And yes, dingoes really have eaten human babies. If you happen to be alone or in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could be on the losing end of a vicious dingo attack. It's recommended that you always stay in a group, make lots of noise, and don't provoke the wildlife. Fraser Island's beach is one of the worst in the world, partly due to the dingoes, but also because of the marine life. Great white sharks might bite your legs off, but there's also jellyfish and poisonous stingrays. The Australian box jellyfish is one of the most venomous marine animals in the world, with huge tentacles like bootstraps that can grow up to 10 feet, 3 meters long. There's also the irukandji jellyfish to worry about, a tiny thing that only grows to be about a cubic centimeter in size, but is so venomous that it can cause a fatal brain hemorrhage. Wildlife expert Rob Drew said the sting of an irukandji jellyfish is 100 times worse than being bitten by a cobra, and 1,000 times stronger than a tarantula bite. Finally, the worst thing about Fraser Island is that there are no medical facilities. If you get bit by a shark or stung by a jellyfish, there's nowhere nearby to get help. 9. The Thumb Splitters of Dewey Beach. Beaches all across Delaware, including Dewey Beach and Delaware Seashore State Park, are home to flocks of crawling mantis shrimp. Usually, shrimp don't pose a threat to humans. But mantis shrimp are not something you want to mess around with in the wild. These tiny crustaceans are sometimes called thumb splitters. And are highly aggressive, can injure a person, and even murder your pet. There's a few different species of the crustacean, but the one found in Delaware is the Atlantic mantis shrimp. This creature has a set of long claws and almost looks like an aquatic praying mantis. Its claws lash out in a quick slashing motion, and even though the mantis shrimp is small, its strike velocity is immense. Its powerful claws boast some of the fastest movements of any creature on our planet. It only takes about 8 milliseconds for the mantis shrimp to strike, or 50 times faster than you can blink. Getting hit by something so small yet so powerful can be damaging even for a human. Mantis shrimp punches typically cause deep wounds and bloody lacerations. Sometimes there's a loss of tissue, heavy bleeding, and bones can even be broken. The claws cut so deep, an ulcer sometimes forms and doesn't heal for at least 3 weeks. 8. Spai Beach. Spai Beach in South Africa is one of the most dangerous tourist destinations on the continent. This beach is mostly famous for 2 main reasons. It's an amazing location to watch whales, and guided tours take visitors out on boats to photograph the migrating sea creatures as they swim off the coast of Africa. It's also known to have one of the densest populations of great white sharks found anywhere in the world. Since 1995, this place has been a major destination for cage diving with great whites. Tourists visit South Africa to see the wildlife at Kruger National Park and to see the great white sharks at Spai Beach. As you can imagine, swimming in the same place with an extraordinarily high number of sharks can have its problems, and yet not as many fatalities occur as one might expect. A 21-year-old local man was killed by a great white in January of 2004, but nothing else has been reported since then. However, the biggest incident that happened here came a very long time ago. On February 26, 1852, HMS Birkenhead struck a rock and sank off the coast of Spai. Most of the sailors survived the sinking, but they had a long way to go to reach the shore. As they swam desperately for their lives, most of them were picked off by sharks in the deep water and eaten. The one thing that's kept tourists safe all these years is that it's generally understood that you don't get in the water. The water here is treated like lava, and people know better than to take any chances. 7. Iceland's sneaker waves. On November 10, 2021, a young Chinese woman was swept away to her death at Reynisfjara Beach in Iceland. The tourist was apparently unaware of just how dangerous Iceland's beaches can be. The issue in Iceland is that their waves have a tendency to sneak up on you. If you're standing too close to the shore and not paying attention, what the locals call sneaker waves can creep up out of nowhere, grab you, and drag you back into the water. It's highly recommended to never turn your back on the water when at either Reynisfjara Beach or Kirkjufjara Beach. Sadly, the young Chinese woman in 2021 was not the only person to become the victim of Iceland's deadly beaches. On January 9, 2017, a German woman on vacation with her family suffered the same fate. She was snatched by a sneaker wave at Kirkjufjara Beach, like Poseidon had reached out and grabbed her, and the wave knocked her husband and children over as well. However, they narrowly escaped the undertow with their lives. Then, in 2007, the same thing happened to an elderly American woman who was washed out to sea. 6. Florida beaches. Following Hurricane Ian in 2022, Health officials in Florida warned the public against swimming at any local beaches. The beaches in Florida, particularly in Lee County, went from places to rest and relax in the sun to potential death traps. The Department of Health issued an advisory warning against swimming at the beach because of dangerous bacteria, waterborne illnesses, and industrial chemicals. A short dip at the beach can now cause a person to become deathly ill. Residents were urged to avoid contact with all water. Any kind of floodwater, pool water, and anything from a river or lake was considered highly contaminated. The Department of Health said floodwater could contain traces of fecal matter from sewage systems and even septic tanks. The water could also be bubbling with agricultural and industrial waste. This is because the hurricane destroyed septic tanks, swimming pools were filled with brackish water, sewage treatment facilities were thrown offline, and much of that contaminated water drained into the ocean. The tide then brings all that bacteria-ridden water to the shore, where unsuspecting beachgoers could get extremely sick. The danger will go away with time, but for now, Florida beaches should be considered cesspools for festering disease and poisoned water. 5. Haunted Dumas Beach. Dumas Beach in India has a reputation for being the most haunted beach in the world, as well as being one of the most haunted places in India. The beach sand is black, which most people believe is what spawned the horror stories of cursed and dark magic attached to it. Some say centuries ago there were mass cremations done there, which blackened the sand with remains of human corpses. The dead are still part of the beach, and their spirits are said to guard the place. There are all kinds of urban legends attached to Dumas Beach. Some say if you visit the beach at night and you listen very closely, you can hear the cries and howls of tortured souls. There's another rumor that if you take pictures of the beach at night, strange objects will show up in them later. Anything from random spots of light to the hazy silhouettes of ghosts. There's no way to confirm if this beach really is a haven for lost souls, but what we do know is that the sand's color is black because of high iron and mineral content, not human ashes. Also, the beach is dangerous because of the nearby industrial facilities that have been pumping pollution into the waters for years. Local fishermen say the taste of their fish has been steadily declining, and so has the availability of marine life. People have also reported birds dropping dead from the sky because the whole area is so dangerously polluted. 4. Sigr Beach. Sigr Beach in Greece is one of the most isolated places you can visit. It's on the island of Milos, which began to form millions of years ago after a large volcanic eruption. Years of changing geography have created tall red cliffs, underwater caves, and secret beaches hidden in quiet grottos. Sigr is by far the most dangerous beach in Greece. It's within a secluded cove, has a small strip of white sand, and boasts crystal clear water, but is extremely difficult to reach. The only way to get there is down a long dirt road, and when the road stops, you come across a warning sign. The sign says to descend at your own risk, meaning once you get out of your car, your life is in your own hands. The only way from the top of the cliffs to the beach is by crawling down a rickety wooden ladder through a narrow passage in the rocks. It's extremely steep, and one wrong move could be fatal. It may not seem like a big deal until you've been cooking in the sun all day, you've had a few drinks, and you try to climb a flimsy ladder up a sheer rock wall. At the very least, falling off the ladder would likely result in an immediate trip to the emergency room. 3. The danger of Cipolite. Playa Cipolite is one of the only nude beaches in Mexico. However, it's also one of the best places to be dragged out to sea and suffocated under the powerful currents. The crazy thing about the beach here is that the currents travel in circular patterns. It may look normal standing on the shore, but the currents are swirling like whirlpools just beneath the surface. There are safe zones, but you wouldn't be able to recognize them by just standing in the sand. The truth is, if you wander out past your knees and enter the danger zone, you could be swept into a death spiral. Once you're trapped, the currents make it nearly impossible to get back to shore, as they can carry your body deeper out to sea. The currents are so powerful at the Seite Beach that you can even be pulled out to sea in shallow water. You don't have to be in over your head to be carried off. If this does happen, the best way to escape is to swim parallel to the shore until you find your way out of the currents. 2. Ocean Beach. Ocean Beach in San Francisco is one of the deadliest places you can go in California, not because of sharks or precarious ladders, but because of the dangerous riptides. Ocean Beach is set in a place where geographic conditions form some of the most perilous riptides in the state. It's not unheard of for multiple people to die in a single day when the riptides are especially bad. 3 people drowned on the same day because of the deadly tides. The supervisor of ocean rescue at Golden Gate, Doug Armstrong, says Ocean Beach has no protection for multi-directional swells. This means the beach is constantly battered by the waves and beaten by the tidal flow of the San Francisco Bay. This constant battering creates holes along the sandbar where the rip currents form. You can't see them because they're underwater, but the currents are there, and they're strong enough to pull even the strongest swimmer out to sea. Armstrong goes on to say that there isn't a single time when the riptides are settled, even if the ocean looks calm and peaceful. The best way to avoid becoming a victim of Ocean Beach is by only going knee-deep into the water. Some experts have even suggested swimming anywhere else to avoid a watery death. 1. Holes in the sand. In North Carolina, a small town on the Outer Banks issued a desperate plea to the public in May of 2022. They begged beachgoers to stop digging holes along the oceanfront. Only hours before a teenager died at the beach in New Jersey when a hole he had dug collapsed on him. The teen, only 18 years old, was playing with his sister when the accident happened. They were digging a huge hole on the beach together, but then the hole collapsed and the teen suffocated in a deadly avalanche of sand. Back in North Carolina, county officials with Kill Devil Hills begged the public to stop digging after they came across a gigantic pit on the beach that was nearly 7 feet, 2 meters deep. Holes like this can trap sea turtles, kill their babies, and fatally injure humans as well. Somebody walked into one of these holes at night in 2017 and broke their foot in 4 places. In 1999, a teenage girl was digging a similar hole when a wave crashed into it, covering the little girl in wet sand with no way to get out. The moral of the story is that sometimes the most dangerous things on the beach are man-made.
Thanks for watching. Would you be more afraid to eat a recalled food item during a bacteria outbreak or a box of chocolates that came from a mystery sender? Let us know in the comments down below.